Doesn't seem to. Okay, it is working. It's recording. Welcome, I say again, welcome to Critical Thinking of Society. It's a course code 302093 in Department of Sociology, Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities of TDTU. Okay, welcome, and this year, this date, August 14th, in this year 2020, the year of chaos. Fires in Australia, COVID-19, floods, killer wasps, Trump, locusts in India, crazy year. As I say, I'm going to go through the course outline, first of all, and then a lecture. So this will be 10 or 15 minutes on the course outline to describe that to you, what's going to happen in the next 15 weeks. And then the lecture, which is maybe about 75, 80 minutes. 90 or a bit more minutes in total. Okay. If at any point anyone has any trouble, please sing out. Turn on your microphone and say, "John, help." And we'll sort that out. Okay. Welcome. So, let me change the slide thing. The course objectives in this course, Critical Thinking of Sociology, is to know and understand the concepts, issues, and methods of engaging critical thinking in the social sciences. Each one of those terms, of course, deserves critical appraisal in itself. Okay, someone wanted to join the meeting, but they didn't stay around. Okay. Critical thinking. What is critical? Does it mean just ripping shreds off someone, or is it a systematic thing? Is it like in other disciplines, anthropology, sociology, is it a discipline in itself, or is it something that belongs to all other disciplines, which I would favor? What it entails, we'll think about during the course. I'm particularly interested in thinking about the context, the institutional position, and perspectives that people bring to critical thinking in the social sciences. Objective number 2, to be able to apply critical thinking methods and activities such as reading, writing, arguing, lecturing, and sociological issues. Okay, so it's not just to become a lecturer in sociology, but it's to learn we call them soft skills, I suppose, of applying critical thinking and methodologies to any kind of reading or writing. So this will become something useful in your future, whether you're writing reports in a company or to a court or to some committee or something, a whole range of possibilities. Giving a presentation in a workplace, from an NGO through to a television station. To apply critical thinking means contextual awareness, maybe, and bringing some historical knowledge to your evaluation of what is going on where you are, which is number 3, really, to reflect critically on your own position and others, and to do so within the institutions. So within the university, first of all, because that's where we are, and to ask these questions about the responsibility of each of us and of the social sciences in general to provide critical evaluation of social practice. I mean, that's the be-all and end-all, really, of being in the social sciences. So then we have learning outcomes. Maybe the first thing we should be critical of is why we need to have objectives and outcomes all documented on some kind of form that went to a committee and was, I assume, was approved. I don't know who checks these things, but anyway, learning outcomes. So this is what happens at the end. You're supposed to then be able to know and remember elements of critical reasoning. through the analysis of sociological and social issues, interpersonal and social relations, social inequalities, and social organization. That's a typo there. Social. It should just be social organization. And to know how to cite sources and build arguments through reading material, and to practice this through class presentations. There are 2 typos in that. Let me fix them. And this is the joy of being able to do things online. You'll see, and save. I'm fairly happy to say that we lost the presentation though. Yeah, it's back now. Happy to show that this is a work in progress, right? I'm still in the process of putting this together. Learning outcome, and to practice this through class presentations. Now, because we're online for the first few weeks, the class presentations will be put on hold. We'll work out how to do them when we meet, okay, in, I hope, 2 weeks' time. If we don't, I'll think of some other format, but I'm expecting, I hope we're all expecting and hoping and confident that we'll be back in person before the end of August. Let's see. So instead of presentations at present, we're just going to stick to how things are standard in my courses, which is that we'll do a review of the reading each week. But we'll talk about that a bit further down the track. Let's go back to the course learning outcomes. See number 2. So at the end, hopefully you will be able to deploy an analysis that utilizes critical sociological theory. Show how elements of a critical debate built up through reading materials and class presentations can convince audiences with arguments and advanced social knowledge, right, or reviewed by your peers. Okay. Course learning outcome 3 of 4, to review and evaluate competing statements, evidence in sociological articles. To assess the strengths and weaknesses of sociological works, right? This is to evaluate sociology, right? To be able to look at sociological texts and say, well, this one is good and solid and recommended, and this one is flawed and flimsy, right? We're using the principles of logical reasoning and working through reading materials in various ways, various methods, and learn through exchange with each other in class presentations and feedback and justification to be able to assess the strengths and weaknesses of sociological works, and in fact any works, philosophy, anthropology, any kind of text really is up for critical evaluation. And learning outcome 4 of 4, to apply sociological knowledge to distinguish between scientific and non-scientific sources of evidence, to differentiate persuasive and performative argument practices and learn methods through reading materials to build class presentations, participate in criticism, and have a no-tolerance attitude to plagiarism and other self-destructive bad habits in scholarship. You'll know by now that plagiarism is a thing for me. I think it's really important for the university as a whole that we recognize the labor of others and don't get a reputation for not doing our own work. And so all work in this course needs to be your own work. If you're doing cut and paste, you know you're going wrong. But here, differentiate persuasive and performative argument. I spend a lot of time on thinking about how people make an argument, by examining how people make arguments in some of the texts we'll study, but also how they deploy critique, critical thinking. Okay, so they're the outcomes. The course content, well, it's everything really. I mean, critical thinking surely has to be applicable to every single course. But the social sciences and humanities, our faculty and its area, we have a role across the university. We do courses for every student at the university, from the philosophy, politics courses, Marx, Lenin, Ho Chi Minh thought, right? But in general, the social sciences and humanities have a role across the university and across society. It's crucially important as regards a critical capacity of our societies. And this is for staff, students, and everyone else in the university. And I want to talk a lot during this course about other people in the university whose labour contributes to critical thinking, even if they are not the active one in the moment of a presentation or even in the room necessarily. We think about how much work, how much labour by how many different people makes it possible even just to have the conversation we're having right now. We won't go through that right now. We will at some point during this course think as carefully as we can about all the forms of labour that make it possible to go on at all, and how we should acknowledge that. Well, the question of whether we should acknowledge it, that's the question of plagiarism, I suppose. Do we have a duty? It's an ethical question, maybe. Do we have a duty to provide a social critique that completes and complements the political projects that may exist? Without ethical and moral knowledge, practices, research ethics, plagiarism rules, perspectives on the use of knowledge, its storage, archiving, its redeployment in other fields. I mean, without the orders of all of those different things where we've had long discussions in the social sciences and humanities about how they work, without them, it's a free-for-all. And you can get, without them, you end up with fake news and Trump, and you can lie to everyone and still get to be president of the United States. Chaos. Okay, so what are these structures? Ethics committees, plagiarism rules, the institution of all of its habits and practices, and the mechanics of it: storage, archiving, interface, formats, the lecture format. All of these things, where do they come from? And they have a history. We can think critically about them as well. So this course really is a reflection on our institutional context. That's one part of it. That's really key. Education for me cannot be pre-canned rote learning or form-filling, a target pursuit, tick off these outcomes and objectives. If it limits creative critique, spontaneity, and the possibility of imagination, of wild thought. So here are the course lecture topics. There are 15, but I've put them into 10 categories. Asking the right questions, reason and arguments, embodied knowledge, critical reading, evaluating assumptions, evaluating evidence, the writing process, sources of knowledge 1 and 2, quantitative versus qualitative, and review. And within that, there will be 5 sessions where we will just spend time reading critical texts, line by line, very carefully. So I didn't put them down as lecture topics, but they are part of the course as well. I haven't worked out how that will happen if we have to do it online, but it's later down the path. I'm sure we can do that online. There's no reason what is done in a lecture theatre can't happen online as well. The only difference is, unless I go and change the layout, I'm going to change the layout to see, well, I can't see any of you in your, so the very conditions of an online lecture are worth thinking about critically, because I can't see your faces and get feedback. That kind of interpersonal communication that is done face-to-face. It's very different. I'm not saying worse or better. Very different when it's online. I mean, in some ways, it could have advantages to do it online. What they are, we could discuss. The key reading for this course is Stefano Hani and Fred Moten's book, The Undercommons. Very difficult book, I'm sorry. But, you know, we're in a university, we have to do difficult texts. That's the point of higher learning and critical thinking, but a very fantastic book nonetheless. And Stefano Hani is now a TDTU staff member, not actually on campus, but a research fellow of our research group. And hopefully he will come to the campus next semester, if the airport's open, right? The other readings are Thorsten Veblen, The Higher Learning in America. He's an American a scholar, was in Chicago and then California, writing about 100 years ago, 102 years ago. Well, actually 110 years ago, because the book took 112 years ago. The book took 10 years to get into print. It was so controversial then. Not so controversial now, but very interesting and I think accurate. And another text is Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak? And if you haven't read that text already, it really is an important and crucial one for sociology, and difficult, but nonetheless. Okay. So we're in a break, in between slides now. So I'm going to, actually what I really got to do is sort out this PowerPoint situation. Hang on one sec, how to change this. Look, I'm going to leave this slide here for a minute or two while I just get something. I'll be back in a second. Please read this one carefully as you are joining this course. This is a really densely packed paragraph, but I want to really embed it, and I'll be back in a sec. Okay, I hope I'm back. I hope you didn't hear that. I was telling my children to be quiet and not to use the internet while I'm trying to do this. Another problem with all of us being online, right, is other people in our households need to use the Wi-Fi, and it slows things down. Anyway, they're quiet now. So I'm going to change the PowerPoint to the lecture. I hope. Number one. Okay, critical thinking and the social sciences. Present now. Why does it take so many clicks? You should be able to do this in one click when you want to present. All right. Anyway, I am now presenting you the. Is it working? Okay. If anyone can't see both me and the PowerPoint slide, which has a cup of coffee, which is a still from a Jean-Luc Godard film. You sing out. If you can't see it, please say. And I'll work out what's wrong. But everything seems to be functioning. Okay. No talking means no talking. So we're in lecture 1. And this is the paragraph I've been talking about. Thinking, critique, and context are the 3 themes for examining this overall rubric of the course. Context is not the only important, but perhaps the first principle. Right? Context, you should ask where the person saying something to you is coming from. Question of perspective. The second principle has to be their method. How does the person speaking to you, making an interpretation of the context, how do they go about their critique? What is the method appropriate to their perspective? And finally, how does this fit the institution? Right, so your first question, even though many of you already know where I'm coming from, should be the person you're listening to right now. Where are they coming from? And I've translated some of these, so it makes it a bit easier. Though I'm not going to speak it in Tingviet because you'll laugh too much about my accent. The context and perspective. I have a particular approach, right? Not everyone will be the same. That's a good thing. And you shouldn't expect it not to be completely individual and perspectival and my interpretation and not necessarily right, not necessarily wrong. Critical of others, accepting of others, like any other human, some ego investment, some anxieties and insecurities, some level of arrogance, I have to admit. But the basis of the discussion for me is my background, my history. And it comes to me from spending a lot of time thinking about building a global humanities institute that we, TDT, participates in now. And that experience has been very important for thinking about what is the role of critical thinking in the social sciences. And then I spent 10 years running the visual anthropology program at the University of London, Goldsmiths. And that shaped my perspective, right? There was a context and perspective, as well as 10 years then following that as the academic director of the Center for Culture Studies. Goldsmiths. And culture studies is we can get into endless debates about what is the difference between sociology, anthropology, culture studies, maybe geography, human geography, or critical geography, and history and other disciplines. And culture studies sort of claims it's interdisciplinary and can steal from each, and it doesn't do that unevenly either. Personalities, context and perspective and institutional position are factors, shaping factors in that as well. And it's important to examine how that institutional context shapes what can be knowledge, and how knowledge is presented as knowledge or information. Okay? Not every slide will have a translation underneath it or next to it, but many do. Methodology, I'm going to talk a lot about methodology in this first class, because talking about my method of working will give you a clue to working out how I think critically to solve problems. Now, it's not the only way to do so. How I think through putting things together in ways that I think will move us forward, solve problems, or get interesting things to happen. And my name for this methodology that I've developed for myself within anthropology, visual anthropology, and sociology, within cultural studies, is to seek what I call incommensurate practices and conversations that innovate. So as something new can happen. Right? Innovation, we know, is the most profitable part of any business because that's what puts you ahead of any close competition. Right? It's risky, but it's proven. Think about in capitalism, right? Where you want to be is the innovating end of any commodity sector. If you're making phones, you want to be leading the phone market. You do that by innovating. If you're the one who's inventing a new thing to do with these gadgets, or even inventing the gadget, you're likely to be ahead of the game, so to speak. How do you do that? Well, one way that we experimented with in the Center for Cultural Studies, and I think one way that I continue to work with, is by putting groups of people together that might not have obviously gone together, and getting them to have a conversation that innovates. So putting neuropsychologists into a room with artists to see how advances in neuroscience mean we need to rethink how to draw the brain. That was something that invented the new discipline of neuroaesthetics. So let me explain a little. We put neuropsychologists, so they had developed new theory about how the brain works, how synapses connect, and how the brain operates to generate energy, electricity, synaptic connections, and so on. And neuropsychologists now know a lot more than the people who first drew brains, the human brain, did, right? Think of the drawings of the human brain that we have. They go back hundreds of years to Leonardo and the first autopsies. And that drawing of the brain hasn't changed much. And now that we know so much more about how the brain works, should we stick with the same old visual representation of the brain, or should we try to think of ways to map mental activity and draw it in ways that fit the neuropsychology better? And that generated an amazing discussion about virtual space and virtual limbs and how the brain works to think the body and in the body and its connection to disciplines and so on. A whole area of generating images, drawing, and aesthetics of the brain. So this new area of thinking, neuroaesthetics, was sort of invented. Very interesting. By bringing together neuropsychologists, and they're real scientists, right, and artists who are the least academic. Actually, in the events that we had, it really looked like the artists tried to dress up more like scientists, and the neuropsychologists looked very fashionable and groovy, and opposite the stereotypes. But it was very interesting. So this was conversation that innovated a new area, and it was two groups that you wouldn't normally think to put together. It wasn't obvious that you would ever put those two groups together to generate knowledge, and yet it did. And we had fantastic discussions, for example, about the weather project, the sun project, by Olaf Eliasson. Olaf Eliasson is an artist who works really on how the brain works. For example, this image that you see on the screen now is the sun, which is in a lecture theatre. But this sun was also the central exhibit in the Tate Modern Turbine Hall, this huge room in Tate Modern Museum in London, which was filled with a kind of misty smoke and then this yellow light, and everything else was dark. And it created an alien kind of atmosphere and world that people could walk into. And honestly, the social interactions that people had in that space was somehow different to the everyday, because their perception of space, of where each other was, and so on, was distorted because of the strange yellow glow and the mist, and everything was a bit foggy. And it became a real celebrated event to go into this other world, you know, as if on another planet. And then we talked a lot about how the external stimuli on a body changes how it relates, how we relate to each other. Eliassen's work, with the artist Olaf Eliassen, he's from Denmark, his work is often about this kind of psychological, neuroaesthetic effect. So how our brains see the world and how to maybe tamper with that. I mean, one beautiful thing he did once, he told me about this, he told us about this. It was his wife's birthday. And you know, if you look at a light, like a light bulb, and you look at it very briefly, but then you look away, the after image of the light bulb is still there in your eyes. You know, you look at the light, and because of the tungsten element inside the light, when you look away, you still can see a kind of afterglow of the light. Right, now, using this principle, he made a little hot wire inside a pair of binoculars of his wife's name, and it flashed red. When she put her binoculars and pressed a button, it would flash red just for a second, not long enough to even read the word inside the binoculars. But then when she lifted them down and looked up at the sky, the after image was there, and her name was written across the sky in huge letters, right? And this was a birthday present. Playing with the way in which the brain registers images. So the body and the brain registers images on the delay. The image was imprinted on the retina, on the eye, but it was not possible to process it because it was so quick. And yet in the after image, it was still there. It was possible to change the context and see where it was. So that gives us some clues into how the eye is connected to the brain or not, how fast the brain can process information. I mean, there was huge discussions about it. Innovative, right? I don't know whether anything comes of that that's helpful for the world or anything like that, but that's how. Okay, next slide. So this is how we worked in the Center for Cultural Studies. We worked by putting incommensurate groups together. So there was a research grant we got on creativity beyond borders. And the idea was to think about how border activism against immigration restrictions that were keeping people out or forcing right, the British border laws are very restrictive, and they lead to disastrous effects, like, for example, what happened with the, was it 37 Vietnamese who were forced to cross into, wanting to get into England. They were, and buying illegal transport across the border from cowboys. They were put into a refrigeration truck to avoid the US police, UK police surveillance, and they suffocated. These deaths are directly the cause of UK immigration policy, which is a crackdown on immigration, on people sneaking into the country, really so the Prime Minister could win the election by looking like they were tough on immigration, which is a racist but conservative position, and increasing the power of the police to enforce that meant people had to try and go underneath the rules, and it's more dangerous, of course, and some die. So in order to re-elect get herself re-elected. Theresa May, who had been the Home Minister when the rules were put in place, she stoked up the hysteria around this issue. So but going down to the detention centre and protesting these events had become a bit boring. It was a routine. People would go and protest at the detention centre. The police would make a barricade, and that was the end of it. A day of shouting, and nothing was changing. So we wanted to get some people to converse that previously hadn't, and try and make activism more interesting. So I got funding to think about creativity in border protests, using people from music, theatre, and film. Okay, so from those areas, to speak with people in border activism. So we did a couple of things. Like, one was this project where we got poets to think about borders. Let me see if I can't shift to the film. Okay. Move my slide, it won't work. All right. We want to present a film. I have to do hang on a sec while I get this up. See, it's not smooth because I have to put it on to different platform, and now I have to share a screen, not a screen, a Chrome page. It's a different style of sharing. Okay, but this should work now. So we got poets to sit with border activists. It's great, you can hear it but not see it right now. Pause. Okay. We got poets to work with border activists in Warsaw. Think about how we talked about how other places can talk about the event of bombing Warsaw during the World War II, and how German border crossing began with a bombing raid. Okay, so what might be a poetic or artistic response to the idea of bombing cities? Of course, this is really relevant to a lot of cities, right? We did it in Guernica. Germans had invaded Spain, right? And they bombed Guernica, the first aerial bombing. And we thought we did it in Dresden. The British bombed Dresden at the end of World War II. Did it in Berlin, did it in London. But I'm going to show you the Warsaw one. It's a beautiful little film. And we should be able to see in a second this film. Okay. Presentation audio. Stop presenting to everyone. No. Okay. So I wonder if I have to turn off my audio. You'll see. You can see the screen. Let me see if we put this on full screen, whether it works. Okay. That should work now. So this is the bombing of poems over Warsaw, 2009, and it was a result of a discussion between poets and border activists, and the idea was to generate something that would be a more interesting kind of protest. Okay, starting now. You start with the helicopter. So everybody's sitting in this open area of Warsaw. The helicopter fly over, right? It should be a popular in Vietnam. It's now open. And from this helicopter, the 1,000 poems that we'd written with the border activists and Warsaw Polish poets were then printed on cards and thrown from the helicopter down on the city. And that looked beautiful in the twilight. It's just dusk. And when they started to land, people raced to photograph them and then grab them doing a kind of calisthenics, a kind of strange dance, trying to capture these things. They were all picked up, except for a few that fell into the river. But and what's written on each card is a poem about the border and about the war, and like kids they were very hard to catch. They were spinning over and over, and then people read them, and it was quite moving, quite an event. Using the sky as a canvas for art. This was a way of thinking something different, of using the city. And kids would run and bring the poems to their parents to read. It's quite, because there were some people who were alive who had been involved in the bombing, like this guy who had been alive at the time. Right, that's just a little, but a good one. No. Okay, I want to stop present now. So on this slide, when you see the playback, you'll be able to see again another link right on this page. The second one, I think, is to the London example of the bombing of poems. We did it as well in Berlin. Can you imagine an English group trying to negotiate to bomb Berlin, even with poetry? Because it evokes so many problematic issues as well. The negotiation was very difficult. So that was another border crossing issue. Because, of course, propaganda bombed from the air. Right? The Americans did that in Vietnam a lot, dropping leaflets about the American way of life and how great Coca-Cola was, and so on. Propaganda bombing is part of the history. We wanted to talk about that history as in relation to borders, and it generated new and critical ideas. Of course, in Britain, the border is a huge problem, right? It used to say, "Welcome to Britain," at the UK border, but now it says border control. Right? Things have got much worse than they were, I think. Deeply problematic, these things. So we took our search for innovation and thinking to the Clandestino Festival, a music festival. We had a conference in between the music festival, so we got musicians to think about the border, and we took it to a film festival, Copenhagen Documentary Festival, and a theater festival in Berlin. The theater festival, they were celebrating the fall of the Berlin Wall 20 years ago, in 1989, it was 2009, so 20 years. And they had created a foam, polystyrene wall, these 8-foot high polystyrene things that they'd got children all over the world at the Goethe Institutes all over the world to paint. And then they lined them up and like dominoes made them fall. But because anarchists and socialists were opposed to the government and its events in Berlin at the time, they had to put up new walls to protect this wall after a few days. So it was interesting that the celebration of the fall of the wall became another kind of theater, a theater of having to build walls to protect walls. Now, of course, the wall is still all over the world. Building of walls is deeply political. Not just the wall around Jerusalem and Israel to keep the Palestinians locked in, the wall around the White House, the wall between America and Mexico. So everywhere, a wall in Spain again to stop Moroccan, in Gibraltar. Sorry, I mean the politics of the wall itself and banging your head against the wall is something to be discussed. So this conference had raised many of these workshops, conversations between people, theatre people and border activists, musicians and border activists, film people and border activists, poets and border activists, raised things that were perhaps not visible to us before that conversation went on. We gathered it all together in the big No Borders convergence at the end, and you don't have to read all of the details in this. This was a kind of summing up event. So critical thinking in the social sciences, for me, it's not a mechanical thing where you just sit and be a critic. I mean, that's legitimate as well. You can do that if you want. But it's not something where you're on your own. It's better. The critique is more effective when you can get people that force you to change the way you think. Okay, so one thing we tried to do in 2008 is we thought it worked so well, the thing with the neuropsychologists and the artists, that we can get artists together with the people from the finance sector, money. But that just led to the 2008 economic crash. No, it wasn't really our fault, but it's interesting that happened at the very time we were trying to think critically about how money flows are represented in the world. So we'd put border and music, border and theatre, border and film together, and tried to think about how these things generated new critical ideas. And the bombing of poems, what was new about thinking about the city in that way, or going back to something that happened historically and thinking how it can be used in a new way. Now, I don't know whether these conversations really work, or even what are the best conversations to have. Which conversations are not happening? Which groups are not talking together, and how can we get them to talk? All right. We'll talk a bit in this course about beverage capitalism. One thing I'm into thinking about is how important the coffee shop is in Vietnam. Now people don't think critically about that. It's like everyone's doing a startup coffee venture, everything from a street stall to the big chains, beverage capitalism. And think about this. The people who work in those shops are doing service and immaterial labor. Of course, there's a lot of talk involved, but a successful cafe is one where in the conversation, you generate loyalty to customers. Think how bad that conversation sometimes is with Starbucks, when they always ask you, so what's your name? And they write down your name. They don't check if it's really your name or anything. It's not a surveillance thing. I always give an imaginary name. But they are trying to make money from the idea of having a relationship through conversation. Hope you have a nice day. And this is the smile and the little bit of chat that helps you lock you into being a customer. And coffee shops also now sometimes come as inside bookshops, and there's a whole lot of ways in which the thing of buying a simple coffee is now being elaborated with a whole lot of other kinds of immaterial labor that we need to think critically about, because this is how the capital relation maintains and reproduces itself. Think of how the relation between the seller of coffee, the servant who's giving you the coffee, and your economic transaction to get that, and to get that extra shot, to get that flirtatious smile, all of that is a kind of labor. I mean, you can bet that those happy, chappy coffee baristas who smile and give you your coffee and have a chat at the best coffee shops don't really care. They're doing it because they've been told, this is how you be a good barista. This is how you lock in the customers. So if we were in real life, like meeting together in the class right now, what I would be doing is asking you to produce a map, to sit down and map out the relationships, the labor that had got different people into a coffee shop. Imagine your last time that you went to a coffee shop. Who are the different people there, and what labor is going on? And I would have got you to, I had pens and paper ready to hand out to everyone. I would have got you to draw such a map, and we would have had a 15-minute session of paper and pencil fun to set this out. Now, we can't do that as easily online. You're welcome to try this at home, but we can't do the interactive sharing of pencils thing and so on. I have all the pencils ready to go. Yeah. I was going to bring along this set of colors and writing, and we would have drawn a whole lot of little maps of labor relations. Because here again, the attempt is, or the trick is, let me share the slide again. The trick is to innovate by having not only a conversation, to generate critique, but not only by having a conversation between people that hadn't talked together, but to do what is usual, a lecture or whatever, in a way that somehow changes the parameters a little bit. To think about a coffee shop in a lecture. Okay, we're all dreaming of coffee now, and I really want a coffee, etc., etc. Haven't yet trained my kids to make coffee. But to even then think critically, not about the university, but about the coffee shop, I think is generative of new ideas. Right? Coffee shop owners and the government in conversation. Coffee shop owners and sociologists in conversation, thinking about who works here, who, from the customers, what work do they do, and coming in, do they contribute to creating the ambience of a coffee shop? I mean, yes, they do. Of course, you don't go to a coffee shop that has no other people in. I mean, sometimes you do if you want to get some writing done or something, but you also go to a coffee shop because there are other people chatting, because there are your friends are there or not. And we need to think about that labor as well. And of course, also, what about the lives of and the labor of those that make the coffee shop? Everything from the barista who asks you, what's your name and how are you having a good day? Or, for example, once in an Australian coffee shop, someone said, what, you're not at work today? Like, that was un-Australian to ask me Why in the middle of the day, 10 o'clock in the morning, I was not at work. It's like, none of your business, mate. Shocking. Don't even ask me that. You're in Australia. We don't have to go to work every day. You don't have to work like crazy. Anyway, who is in the coffee shop? The labor is not just the barista, of course. There's cleaners. There's the people who build the coffee shops. And we see this happening in Vietnam because coffee shops seem to spring up overnight in every street. There are dozens of them. Win Thi Tap, my street out here, just outside, out the window. I mean, there's a new coffee shop every 6 days. I don't know how they manage to get customers. They do have customers. It's phenomenal, the extent in which the labor chain of coffee house production operates. Think of, right, the growers up in the hills, and there's stories and articles to be written about how they grow and work. So, but the coffee, once it gets here, how people trade up from running a little street stall, a little cart to coffee, and then they've made a bit of capital perhaps, and they can open a store, and how that then trades up increasingly to chains, the coffee house, right? Or I can't remember any of the other Vietnamese ones, but you know, and also Starbucks globally and Seattle Coffee Company. How beverage capitalism is really a whole massive industry that we could spend, you know, even a whole course critically thinking about and investigating and studying. Who builds the tables and the chairs, and who does the decor, and who puts in the glass windows and does the signage, and all this labor that goes towards having the perfect sit down and escape from work coffee moment. Right, even though coffee houses have become a place where you also do work, the idea was to have a bit of time out from work, right? Sit down, have a coffee, enjoy, relax. Well, what is the function? So I wanted to map that, and we could have drawn maps, but we shan't. The idea was to have a conversation about coffee shop in a new, to try and think critically about what is engaged in that space called the coffee shop. Okay, let me try and show you this little bit of lovely film from Jean-Luc Godard. Now, just need to get it going and pause it and change the projection. I'm presenting, but I stop presenting, and then I present now. And a window, this one. And I want to check that it's working. Can anyone see the coffee screen I'm sharing? I think you can, yeah? Okay, now let me play it and see if it plays. Yeah, thank you. So as I say, this is from Jean-Luc Godard's film. 2 or 3 things I learned about her. And what fascinates me about this, what's fantastic about it, that I want to play a couple of times, is how the whole world can be seen inside. The whole world, no. The universe is there inside the coffee cup. Coffee is swirling, right? That's just froth, but that could be the universe. And for this, in this film, there's a 5-minute sequence where He's thinking about the world, he's thinking about relationships with a girl and a gun, of course, because every Goddard film, Goddard had said, how do you make a film where you get a girl and a gun? That's your story. Right? He's thinking about the whole world and his life, just looking at this coffee. Having a coffee is that philosophical, but it's a space for critical thinking, is what I'm saying. I'm saying that what we want to find we want to find moments that allow us to escape from labor, but actually they are, and that's the hand doing labor, they are inevitably bound up with critical thinking and labor, the different kinds of labor that make it possible to have moments outside of labor. Right? That's mesmerizing. The whole world, the whole universe. Okay. Now I can't get out of this. Sorry, we're stuck in the coffee shop. We can't escape. How? Do I stop from preventing that? Okay, we got it. To stop the film as well. Turn it off. I want to go back to the PowerPoint. Let me do it. It keeps on throwing me out of the meeting page. Right, I got it now. Okay. So I'm thinking about the context of critical thinking, our institutional space, saying the coffee shop is an institutional space, but so is the university, and where we are, the perspective and my interpretation, right? Who it is, me, sitting in a coffee shop, thinking about critical thinking, what it is. And I think that our collective thinking, what's happening in the coffee shop is symbolic. The coffee shop being turned into a commodity, and even the smile of the coffee shop barista being turned into a commodity that you pay for. I think we're in one of fear and crisis. Not fear of COVID and floods and bombing, ecological collapse and so on, just a general ambient fear. We're worried about our own safety, so on, and fear of others and so on, and blind to atrocities that are far away and suddenly they're coming home. But I think a worse fear is that our imaginations are under threat, that our critical thinking is made cynical and desperate and somehow second order and not central to what we do, So when we think about education, we think of accumulating information. We're not about telling our perspective. I'm following the work of Walter Benjamin and thinking about the storyteller as crucial for the humanities and social sciences, and that telling stories has somehow become also commercialized completely. Hollywood, think of it, and even Facebook, little film snippets, right, and memes. Our ability to tell a critical and interesting and engaging and innovative story is under threat because we are unable to really face up to and recognize how important it is to think critically about the screams and pain and crisis that is the world. Yes, we think about this all the time, and yet we feel completely paralyzed and muted. In fact, words that talk about disabilities, to be paralyzed, to be muted, to be silenced, unable to speak. This is the language of disability. It's ableist to think that we need to be able to think critically, or that we don't do it already all the time. But putting it out there to other people is a crucial part of our responsibility and our ethics in the social sciences. We live in the middle of a distortion economy. With celebrity attention and diversion, fake news, images that intrude merely to shock us and do nothing. They are absorbed and ignored because they necessarily wash over us because we feel, what can you do? This is violence as well, written in stagnant blood. So in critical thinking of the social sciences, I want to keep on asking a number of questions. And these questions, over and over, in the environmental crisis we think of, and what we think of, and to interrogate that. What do you think of? Plastic Island or something like that. And what does that really mean? What does that encourage us to do? The population crisis. I mean, do we think that the planet is overpopulated? I mean, if you look at people per square mile, it's not. I mean, despite Vietnam having some cities with the greatest density, there's still a lot of land. And think of where I'm from, Australia, 2 people per square mile is the average in Australia. There's space. But people are saying, 8 billion people on the planet, we can't survive. We can't survive because 8 billion on the planet, but only like a few 100,000 are really, really well off, exploiting everyone else. That's not sustainable, but we can feed everyone if we reorganize that economy. But economic crisis, how do we think of that? Do we have the confidence to think what's necessary? How do we represent our thinking? How do we represent confidence? How do we represent crisis? How do we represent investment or depression or recovery or COVID or flooding, environmental or conceptual crisis? How do we represent the representation of distraction? How do we tell these stories? And who will tell these stories, if not people in the humanities and social sciences? So in the university, we need to think about this. Innovation in terms of practice and content is only the beginning of it's only beginning to be widely valued within the universities. I mean, it was education, but that was for an elite. Now, a wider spread of education for all, one where creativity needs to not be under threat by more materialist and measurable outcome demands. The ranking of the university or how many points you got on an essay. What's more important? Of course, the points are important. Yeah. But what's more important is to see that Education is something much more than just information collection. The ranking competitions, what's called metrics, right? The targets, the pre-canned rote learning, they tend to limit critical thinking, spontaneity, adaptability, right? And we are called to account, teachers, researchers, students, members of the university, who are called to account for the economic value more than cultural value of what we do. And our curricular development, our course guides and so on, need to show at best a foundational role in vocational training, right? That's why we have those outcomes, those objectives and outcomes modeled at the beginning of the course, like some kind of mechanical system. We need to think critically about what that is making us, how that is making us, narrowing our thinking. To think always that it's vocational, think always that it needs to have an outcome, to think always there should be a result is a perspective. One perspective among many. So we are, I think, in a general crisis. And I think instead we need to seek ways where we can cultivate, agricultural metaphor, the critical wherewithal, not just to look up data and manipulate information, Google search, right? Not just that, but to handle this information critically with a reflective, considered, and extended research. So in the social sciences and humanities, we talk about research. What does that mean? Research. Searching means searching an area that you kind of know exists, but you know there's something you don't know. Searching for that. Searching in the humanities and social sciences contributes ways of knowing new things, innovation. Not information retrieval. The information is there already, globalizing huge archives in the internet and so on. But how do you handle that critically? Not just efficiently, critically. How do you handle it as a way of thinking what could be new and better? If the new is better, sometimes the old is better. But we want to do this because thinking at all means thinking something new. Thinking, not, it could be something old that you learn from history, but thinking something new to you. The whole point of doing any course is to think differently than you do now. How do we do that? That's what this course tries to do by thinking about the university, the institution. How do we think differently about our way of being in the world? And what can we learn from other people who have done that? Now, if the university were no longer a place for that kind of research, or for the extension of searching knowledge beyond information retrieval, then critical faculties could not be open to even the possibility of seeing things differently than we do now. The point of education, of intellectual inquiry, all of it, is to change your mind. I'm not saying what it needs to be changed to, just the possibility of thinking more deeply, differently. This is a basic orientation that we neglect if we just talk about objectives and outcome. So the perspective of open inquiry and extending that perspective is what we need in the current conjuncture. The current situation requires that, I think. Okay, that's the end of the slides, but the thought itself I want to keep. And yes, I do want to say thank you. So, okay, I want to say a little bit more about the mechanics of the course. So let me try and put you into, on Google Classroom. Oh, sorry, I need to take a second. After that little romantic, idealistic claim, let me share the Google Classroom page. Okay, this is the Google Classroom for our course. And you'll see there is a PDF of the course outline, I suppose. And I will put here, it says share something with your class. I will put, it takes about a half an hour for the recording to be processed. I'll put the recording there. Then on classwork, this second tab here, I will put the weekly assignment and the reading. So the reading is what you read during the week, your own time, besides all the other things that you read in the library and or at home and so on that you're doing. Specifically, I'm looking for a personal response to the reading. So between 40 and 140 lines, words, sorry, like between 20 and 60 lines, not more, of a personal response to the reading. I don't mean a summary, and I certainly don't want any summaries that are cut and pasted or even translated. I try and write it in English because I'll take this as an opportunity to help with your expression in English, correcting your expression. So write it out, just a personal response, short personal response in English, and put it on the classwork page. And so we'll have by the end 15 of these that will contribute to your process score, which is 30% of your overall. Okay. Then further on assessment, there will be, as is usual in my class, 20% is the midterm, and that will be a plan for an essay, and it's like a page. And then the final, which is worth 50%, slightly different in this course, because this is an advanced course. It's not really an essay, but it's a prospectus for an imaginary university that you would like to attend. What would your ideal university courses and structure and administration look like? Now, over the next few weeks, the whole course, we'll be talking about what is involved in having a university, a mission statement, some aims, division of faculties and disciplines, all of these other things that have to be taken into account. And so I'm going to get you to write some kind of report on what would be an ideal for that. And we'll do most of that in class. The midterm as well, I hope that we do in class. And it will also entail color. Okay. On top of all that, I think there's not much more. All right, I'm going to end the recording in a minute, and that recording, I say, will be processed and put onto Google Classroom, as you see, along with the readings and some other things that I find that I think will be of interest. And you can ask questions on that stream, or you can ask them here now. I will stay online for a little while and end the class and talk to people if they want to, or even on the chat, respond to any questions you have, any issues or concerns. Otherwise, this is the end. Thank you for listening. I'll stop the recording now. And